Not so long ago I was making another video, much like this, but about Manchester. Now, for all the fact that more people were hurt in Manchester, London means more to me. It was my second home for 10 years or so. I especially know the area in which all this happened quite well. Southwark, London Bridge, Tower Bridge, the market, all that kind of area. I know. I know people who lived there. Waiting to hear back from a few of them that they're okay. So, not people I've seen in years, but you still end up caring about people. Human emotions don't necessarily make sense, So I care more about London and what happened there than I do about Manchester, which is like another country to me. That's just the way it is. I made this video before about Manchester and how depressing and predictable it was, the way in which everyone was reacting and talking and politicizing it, and so you can't help but politicize terrorism. It's a political act. It makes sense to politicize it and talk about it and how it relates to politics, but still it was just so fucking predictable and upsetting. And here we are again, and it's playing out again. And I particularly see people who don't know the United Kingdom, don't know London, don't know our culture around things like guns or policing or whatever, and just don't understand. And they're trying to impose their own projections upon my country, much as I care about nationalism, which is about that much. And when it's even a president trying to do that, it just doesn't make any sense. There is value in people commenting on your country and so on from outside, because you get different perspectives, but it has to come at least somewhat from a place of understanding. So, I'm going to talk about the situation and the stuff I've seen that pisses me off. So you...
Shut up and sit down, you big bald fuck.
The first major thing that I want you to understand is that we are not at war. Unfortunately, this country is used to terrorism. The entire time I have been alive, we have been being regularly bombed and attacked by one bunch of assholes or another. Okay? So now they have an Arabian accent, whereas previously they had an Irish accent. That's about it. It happens a bit more often, and we have a bigger population and all these other issues, and a different news cycle, which makes a huge difference to how all this is reported and how people react to it and all the rest. These are important things to consider. I have been caught up in an IRA bomb scare. I've been caught up in Islamic bomb scares. I went to London not long after the 7/7 bombings. I've been around this shit. We've all been around this shit if we live in, around, or visit any of our major cities. As long as we've been alive, okay? It's nothing new. There's also elements of the British character, I guess, which means that we don't react to these things in the way some people perhaps think that we should. This keep calm and carry on, this just keep doing what you're doing, is part of the British character for good or ill. The blitz spirit. I think it makes us a bit passive, even though it's not pacifistic. I think there's downsides to it. But this is the way in which we show defiance in this country. This is how we show our resilience. This is how we show our resistance. We carry on and we just, keep going. That's what we do. That's what we do in terms of personal tragedies as well. Keep life as normal as possible and keep going on, and we show our defiance by not changing what we do. We don't fly off the handle and go and bomb some random brown nation, generally. tends to just make things worse. I think we find so for us, it's the whole keep calm and carry on thing isn't surrender. When you see our leaders calling out in the news or the newspapers or in online articles or social media, whatever, saying, let's just keep doing what we're doing, that's not surrender. It's not something that doesn't work. That's how we give terrorism and threats and so on the middle fucking finger in this country. That's who we are. It's not weakness. It has its issues, but it's not a sign of weakness or surrender. Nor are we a gun culture. Nor do we wish to be a gun culture. It's a little bit disturbing in that more and more younger Brits, I guess millennials, I suppose you might say, seem to be being Americanized in regard to their relationship with firearms. They would like to be armed. They have bought into the unsupported arguments that this somehow would help. The response time from beginning to end of this incident was 8 minutes. That's it. 4 armed police specialists, specially trained to turn up and deal with the issue, shooting the attackers dead. That entire span was 8 minutes. Now, that was it. There was a lot of chaos and so on afterwards, but that was the time beginning to end. So how would it have helped for citizens to be armed? It wouldn't. It would be a confusing situation. I mean, we know statistically speaking from observing in other countries that armed people trying to defend themselves tends to go horribly wrong. It very much ups the chance that someone is going to get killed and so on, at least in regular situations. In terrorism situations, possibly different. Probably not, given recreations of the Charlie Hebdo shooting and so on. It didn't seem to make any real difference. But run-of-the-mill situations, having lots of people out there armed, probably isn't going to help. Plus, it's going to increase crimes of passion that end up with people being killed. Whereas at the moment, they maybe end up with someone being stabbed or beaten. If everyone had a gun, you're going to get a lot more dead people. Plus, you're going to massively increase the availability of guns, which is going to cause problems with other crime. So we, by and large, do not wish to be armed. Because we seem to understand as a culture that this isn't helpful. It doesn't make any positive differences. It makes a whole bunch of negative differences. So by and large, we don't want that. Some people seem to understand that, but a lot of people don't seem to understand why we don't want our police armed and why our police don't want to be armed. We don't want our police to be armed because we do not trust our police. Even without guns, there are already problems with the police force in this country, just as there are problems with the police force in plenty of other countries. Some of this is a legacy of the 80s, when stop and search laws were abused, much as they're currently being abused in the United States, leading to riots in the inner cities. Yeah, and we had people being beaten to death on the regular. We had issues in prisons and police jail cells, and we had police acting like vigilantes, especially the SPG, who were most famously lampooned on the young ones. They were known for their brutality. So we don't want our police armed because we don't trust them with guns, except in specialist situations. As a result, we have armed units who are highly trained, highly disciplined, and aren't regular beat cops. The cops, by and large, do not wish to be armed either. They value the sense of community that they get by not being as intimidating, by not being as dangerous. They don't want their cops to get into trouble regularly for discharging firearms when they probably shouldn't. It encourages them to seek other solutions, to talk people down, to deal with issues in that way, rather than to resort to violence as a first option, and encourages them to stay fit, I suppose. I've seen how fat American cops are. Little wonder they shoot people. There's no fucking chance in hell they're catching anyone by running. So we don't particularly want guns. Our cops don't want guns. We don't want our cops to have guns. This does not mean we're a surrendered slave culture. or whatever Americans seem to think. It just means we're more secure, more free in a lot of places, in a lot of ways, and we don't want the bully boys of the state to be armed on the regular. Yeah, I don't understand why that's so difficult to grasp, and we're unwilling to pay the price by having like 4 Manchesters a day, which is the sort of equivalent gun death rate in the States, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, we want less people to die, not more, for some fleeting sense of security that would come by carrying a gun around, which almost certainly would make the situation worse, both to police responders and to people there, and make the situation worse in regard to everyday crime and everything. We don't want it, okay? By and large. You can argue it's a cultural difference. I think we're just smarter when it comes to statistics. And we know it wouldn't help. And that's really an end to it. For all we might like to joke, we are not Londonistan or whatever. There are areas that are predominantly one ethnicity or another. Sure, the no-go zone thing gets, massively overplayed by people like Tommy Robinson or Lawrence Southern. They're doing what they do and they're talking about their perceptions, I suppose. Robinson isn't quite the villain he's been painted in the past, but nonetheless they are exaggerating things for the sake of their own agendas. It's just, not true. There are individuals and there are occasionally groups that go around trying to enforce Islamic law or throwing a tizzy when they see alcohol on sale in a corner shop or whatever. But these things get massively overplayed. Now, there are issues today that there weren't in the past, in terms of how intensive these communities have become, how insular these communities have become, how little they try to integrate and become part of the broader society that they're now a part of. I'm not denying that there are issues. I'm arguing the extent to which these things are issues. So you've got the far right way trying to overextend how much of a problem there is, and not even necessarily the far right, just people who don't live here and who are afraid often seem to exaggerate things. Again, that's not to say that there aren't issues. These latest waves of immigration do not seem as interested in integrating and becoming part of British society. And at the same time, we seem to be having problems with second and third generations descended from immigrants who are struggling with some sense of identity. And we're also seeing a backlash against their westernization. And this isn't just limited to Islamic communities. You find it in other communities as well. Another generation or two, and it will probably settle down a bit. But there's this conflict between the archly socially conservative Islamic religion and culture and the more hedonistic and welcoming and tolerant society that we have, especially in the cities where a lot of these communities exist. I mean, people look at the social media feeds and so on of the people that turn out to be terrorists, and they find them drinking and hanging out with women and whatever else, which they assume to be against the Islamic mindset, and it kind of is to an extent. Then you have people on both sides trying to argue this in some way. You got conspiracy theorists on the right saying, "Oh well, obviously they're plants working for the government or whatever." And people on the left trying to use their behaviour to say, "Oh, well, see, it's nothing to do with Islam. It must be to do with geopolitics or whatever." Why not both? But what we seem to understand from studies into the psychology of it is that there is a huge amount of guilt on people who would like to be pious, but who aren't or haven't been or have converted recently. There's no one more evangelical or zealous than a recent convert. And there's also a lot of guilt placed upon people for being hedonistic and living Western lifestyles and all that kind of thing. And that seems to be a driver that is religious for people to do things like this. So we're not Islamized. There are problems, but they're not as big as I said. And I actually think one of our major pros, one of our things that makes us able to win this ideological conflict, is our liberalism, is our hedonism, what the right would call degeneracy. You know, our society is more open, it is more tolerant, it is more accepting, it's not as strictured and buttoned down as Islam, and that is a way to win a culture war. I kind of want to end this on a positive note. There's other things I could have talked about, but there's no need really. I think we can win this cultural war, and that's what it is. I would draw comparisons between this current clash of civilizations and ideologies and the Cold War. And a big part of what won the Cold War was demonstrating that our societies here in the West were freer, more liberal, more tolerant, people had more rights, and so forth. And we're doing exactly the wrong thing if we want to win on that basis. The response to this terrorism and so forth since 9/11 has been a ramping up of security and abrogation of rights and so on. We have given up our freedoms for security. Some people might find that ironic given my earlier speech about guns, but it's always a balance between freedom from and freedom to. Yeah, but they're both forms of freedom. But in this instance, we're giving up important things for nothing. And in the wake of this more recent spate of attacks, we'd see politicians posturing for another assault on our rights and freedoms. Yet again, Theresa May wants to now try and control the internet. These things aren't going to help. These things aren't going to make a difference. The internet has been a great leveler, a way of introducing a more liberal set of ideas into countries that were previously much less so, and that's why they're so desperate to try and control it and block it. But you can't, really. But people seem to want to try. And that does cause damage, even though it can be circumvented. You know, this isn't a way to preserve our culture and make it something enviable, something that people want to be a part of. This is a way to remove that advantage. And I think that's ultimately self-defeating. I believe Western culture is superior, not in the way that white nationalists do. You know, their seeking of traditionalism and so on, I think, is entirely counterproductive. Rather, what makes it superior is its openness. And we can see examples back in history. I mean, the Islamic Golden Age, when Islam was the leading culture and civilization in the world, to an extent anyway, was when it was more open and multicultural, much as people hate to use that term, when it was more tolerant and open and understanding and allowed people to investigate. It's when it became more small c conservative and traditionalistic that it lost that edge. And at the same time, we were starting to experience liberalizations within Europe, you know, the Renaissance and so on. As that came up, that's when we became ascendant. You know, the values of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, of coming to understand the world, of coming to tolerate and be open to an understanding of other points of view, you know, that's what makes us strong. It is our strength, much as people joke about it. Yeah, and that's what will win in the long term. Islam needs to be weakened and crushed in the way Christianity and Judaism and other religions have been. You do that with secularism, you do that with rationality, you do that with liberalism and openness and tolerance, and what you guys love to call degeneracy, sexual openness, you know, free expression, a free internet, the free flow of information, a marketplace of ideas in which the values of the West will win. Because they are better, because they are stronger, because they are based in reality. That's how we win. It's a long haul. There will be a lot of terrorism and nastiness, but we have to decide whether we want to keep a culture that's actually worth preserving and that can win, or whether we just want to blow people up and make further problems for ourselves and repress our own peoples and institutions and everything else along the way. So that's how I think we win. Zang.